My name is Caleb Miller. I am 26 years old, and today I work as a lead systems engineer for a Tier 1 defense contractor in Arlington, Virginia, where I oversee the integration of kinetic interceptor subsystems. But 10 years ago I was nothing more than a nuisance to be discarded, sitting on a cold, oxidized metal bench at the Cincinnati Union Terminal with exactly $8.45 in my pocket and a dying iPhone 5S that hovered at 4% battery. "Let's see how long you last before you start crying for mommy," my older sister, Elena, had sneered at me earlier that morning while she adjusted her gold-rimmed Ray-Ban aviators. She was leaning against the polished fender of her 2014 pearl white Lexus IS 250, a graduation gift from our father that smelled of expensive leather and Jo Malone peony blush suede perfume. I remember the exact sound of her designer heels clicking against the concrete driveway of our family home in Indian Hill, a sound that signaled my official exile from the Miller estate. My father, Marcus Miller, a man whose reputation as a senior partner at a top-tier corporate law firm was built on ruthless efficiency, didn't even look up from his Wall Street Journal as my duffel bag was tossed into the gravel. The humiliation was a physical weight, a suffocating pressure in my chest that made the humid Ohio air feel like lead. Now, as I sit in my glass-walled office overlooking the Potomac, I can still feel the vibration of the Greyhound bus engine through the soles of my worn-out Vans. Back then, the terminal was filled with the smell of stale Auntie Anne's pretzels and industrial-grade floor cleaner, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled silence of the life I had known. My sister's words weren't just a taunt. They were a prophecy she had intended to fulfill by ensuring I left with nothing but a bus ticket to Chicago and the clothes on my back. I stared at the $8.45 in my palm, 3 crumpled singles, 5 quarters, 6 dimes and 10 pennies. It was the price of a mediocre sandwich at a Hudson News stand, yet it was supposed to be the foundation of my new life. Every time I look at my current bank balance or authorize a procurement contract worth 7 figures, I am transported back to that bench, feeling the biting chill of the air conditioning through my thin charcoal hoodie. My father had cut off my access to the family's Chase Sapphire Reserve account the moment I refused to follow his path into law, effectively deleting my existence from the Miller legacy. The injustice of it burned then and it burns now, a cold fire that fuels my drive to outpace every expectation they ever had. Elena had laughed when she handed me the one-way ticket, her manicured fingers flashing a Bulgari ring that cost more than my entire 4-year tuition would have. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand why I am currently staring at a legal notice from my father's firm while sitting in a position of power he can't touch, I have to take you back to that first night in the terminal. The flickering fluorescent lights above me hummed at a constant 60 Hz frequency, a sound that seemed to mock the frantic beating of my heart. I watched the departure board flip through destinations: Indianapolis, St. Louis, Chicago, realizing that for the first time in my life, I was invisible to the world that had previously catered to my every whim. My stomach growled, a sharp reminder that I hadn't eaten since a meager breakfast of toast, but I knew I had to ration every cent. I walked over to a vending machine, the glass dusty and scratched, and stared at a bag of Lay's classic chips priced at $2.25. It was an exorbitant markup, a predatory tax on the desperate, and I felt a surge of genuine rage at the sheer unfairness of the world's mechanics. My sister was likely at a high-end bistro at that very moment, ordering a $40 sea base and charging it to the man who had just rendered me homeless. The contrast was a bitter pill that I forced myself to swallow over and over, until the taste of resentment became as familiar as oxygen. I checked my phone one last time before the screen flickered and died, the black glass reflecting a version of Caleb Miller that looked terrified, hollowed out, and utterly alone. I shoved the dead device into my pocket, gripped the straps of my bag until my knuckles turned white, and waited for the announcer to call my gate, knowing that the boy who boarded that bus would never truly come back. Growing up in the faded industrial suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, I existed as the invisible son in a household that revolved entirely around the radiant orbit of my older sister, Vanessa. She was the quintessential golden child, a varsity cheerleader for the Dayton Christian Warriors whose every social drama was treated by my parents as a high-stakes family emergency requiring immediate emotional and financial intervention. On her 16th birthday, my father, Robert, who worked as a senior claims adjuster for Progressive, walked her out to the driveway to present her with a 2012 taffeta white Honda Civic LX that they had purchased in full for $14,500 in cash. I stood by the garage door, watching the morning sun glint off the polished hood while I adjusted the laces of my scuffed, second-hand New Balance sneakers that I had found in a cardboard bin at the Goodwill on Woodman Drive for $6.99. My existence was treated like a recurring chore, a line item on a budget that my mother, Elena, constantly sought to trim while she simultaneously spiraled into debt to fund Vanessa's elite cheer camps and $300 uniform packages. To survive and maintain some semblance of dignity, I spent every sweltering Saturday and Sunday pushing a rusted Toro recycler mower across 12 different lawns in our neighborhood, charging a flat rate of $20 per yard. I can still smell the pungent mix of freshly shorn Kentucky bluegrass and the oily exhaust of that two-cycle engine as I methodically tracked my earnings in a spiral-bound Mead notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. My ultimate goal was a base-model MacBook Pro, which retailed at the time for $1,199 plus Ohio's 6.5% sales tax, a tool I knew was my only ticket out of that suffocating environment. While Vanessa spent her evenings at the local Grader's Ice Cream or cruising down Far Hills Avenue with her friends, I was calculating fuel costs for my mower and repairing the pull cord with duct tape. My parents never asked how my day was or if I needed help with my advanced placement calculus homework. Instead, dinner conversations were dominated by Vanessa's complaints about the seating chart for the upcoming winter formal or her need for a new North Face Denali jacket that cost a staggering $180. Robert would simply nod, pull out his worn leather wallet and hand over the plastic without a second thought, while I sat silently eating a lukewarm portion of hamburger helper that had been sitting on the stove for 2 hours. I remember one specific evening when I asked for a pair of $20 cleats for the soccer tryouts at Northmont High, only for Elena to sigh and tell me that money was tight this month because they had just spent $400 on Vanessa's private tumbling coach. The blatant inequity of it all wasn't just a series of isolated incidents but a systemic erasure of my worth that began the moment I woke up and ended only when I finally drifted off to sleep. I learned early on that in the Miller household, love was a finite resource, and Vanessa had managed to secure the lion's share before I even had a chance to compete. The cold realization that my parents viewed me as a liability rather than a son hardened into a quiet, focused resolve that kept me moving through the humidity and the dust of those Dayton summers. I wasn't just mowing lawns, I was building a bridge to a life where I would never have to ask anyone for permission to exist or beg for a scrap of attention that was rightfully mine. Every $20 bill I tucked into my pocket was a brick in that foundation. A silent middle finger to the favoritism that defined my childhood and the catalyst for the man I was destined to become. By the time I turned 17, I had saved nearly $3,000, a small fortune built on sweat and the stubborn refusal to be broken by the people who were supposed to protect me. I watched my sister drive away in her pristine Honda, the exhaust humming with the sound of parental approval I would never know, and I realized that while she was being handed the world, I was learning how to take it for myself. This contrast between her gifted life and my earned one became the blueprint for my future. A stark reminder that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty and that some families are just groups of people living under the same roof, waiting for the first chance to leave each other behind. The betrayal materialized on a stiflingly humid Saturday, July 14th, a day where the Ohio heat index had already climbed to a punishing 98 degrees by noon. Vanessa had walked into my room earlier that morning, her eyes hidden behind those oversized Ray-Ban aviators, and offered a rare olive branch by suggesting we take a scenic drive out toward the Great Miami River to escape the suburban stagnation. I remember the tactile sensation of the Honda's upholstery, the 2012 taffeta white Civic idling smoothly as the dual-zone climate control struggled against the heavy, moisture-laden air outside. I thought perhaps naively that this was a turning point in our fractured relationship. A moment where the golden child finally saw her brother as a person rather than a peripheral annoyance. Instead of the river, however, she pulled into the circular drop-off zone of the Amtrak station, the grand Art Deco facade of the terminal looming over us like a silent witness to a crime. "Stay here, I am going inside to get us some hot chocolate from the Concourse Cafe," she said with a casual wave of her hand, her tone so convincingly flat that I didn't even question the absurdity of drinking hot cocoa in a heatwave. I watched her walk away, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of her 4-inch Steve Madden heels echoing against the polished marble floors of the station lobby, a sound that I would later realize was the heartbeat of a calculated abandonment. I sat on a hard wooden bench near the ticket kiosk for exactly 64 minutes, watching the minute hand of the massive wall clock jerk forward in agonizing increments while the ambient noise of the station, the low thrum of idling diesel locomotives and the high-pitched squeal of air brakes, began to settle into my bones. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of stale popcorn from a nearby vending cart and the caustic oily stench of railroad grease, a combination that still makes my stomach churn with a Pavlovian surge of nausea a decade later. At exactly 1:14 p.m., my phone buzzed with a single notification that shattered the last remnants of my childhood. The text message from Vanessa read, "You are always bragging about being so independent and how hard you work, so go ahead and figure it out. Consider this your final lesson in self-reliance." Before I could even type a response, the blue iMessage bubble turned green, and I realized with a sickening jolt that she had blocked my number, effectively deleting my lifeline to the world I knew. I tried calling my mother, Elena, but it went straight to a pre-recorded voicemail, and my father's professional assistant informed me that Robert was in a closed-door meeting and could not be disturbed for personal matters. I was 17 years old with nothing but a half-charged phone and the clothes on my back, standing in a cavernous hall filled with strangers while my sister drove back to our air-conditioned Indian Hill estate in a car my parents had bought her with the change they found in their couch. The sheer calculated cruelty of the act was a physical blow, a betrayal so absolute that it rewired my entire understanding of family and loyalty. I looked down at the station floor, tracing the patterns in the terrazzo tile, and realized that the lesson Vanessa intended to teach me was that I was truly alone, a variable that had been permanently removed from the family equation. The injustice of being discarded like a piece of faulty machinery burned through the shock, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity that I would eventually use to build a life they could never imagine. As the intercom announced the arrival of the Cardinal Line to Chicago, I stood up, gripped my empty pockets, and accepted that the boy who walked into that station was dead, replaced by a man who would never again allow his survival to depend on the whims of people who shared his DNA but none of his heart. Family is supposed to be the safety net that catches you when you fall, but on that humid July afternoon, I learned that my family was the hand that pushed me off the ledge. I sat in that high-ceilinged cathedral of indifference for 3 agonizing hours, the cold realization of my sister's abandonment sinking into my marrow like the damp Ohio humidity. I reached into a nearby overflowing trash receptacle and salvaged a crumpled, greasy napkin from a Five Guys burger order, smoothing it out against the rough wood of the bench with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I fished a chewed-up blue ink Bic round stick pen from the bottom of my backpack, the cap missing and the plastic barrel scarred by nervous teeth marks, and began to map out the wreckage of my future in shaky, desperate script. Option A was the path of least resistance but maximum humiliation. I could use the last of my dying battery to call my parents, Robert and Elena, only to be met with my father's disappointed sigh and my mother's inevitable lecture about how I had failed Vanessa's twisted test of character. I could already hear my sister laughing in the background, her 2012 Honda Civic safely tucked into our 3-car garage while she sipped an iced latte and recounted my weakness to anyone who would listen. Option B was the terrifying precipice of the unknown. I could take my last $8.45, purchase a discounted regional bus ticket to the outskirts of the city, and vow to never again rely on the people who viewed my survival as a game. I stared at the napkin until the ink began to bleed into the grease stains, the choice between my dignity and my safety hovering in the air like a physical weight. I chose B, shoving the napkin into my pocket as a manifesto of my own independence. That night, after the bus dropped me off at a desolate stop on the edge of a darkened industrial park, I began the 4-mile trek through a sudden, torrential downpour that turned the asphalt of Route 4 into a shimmering black mirror. My charcoal hoodie was quickly saturated, weighing 10 pounds and smelling of wet wool and exhaust, while the wind whipped the rain against my face with the sting of 1,000 tiny needles. My cheap sneakers took on water with every step, the insoles squelching with a rhythmic, miserable sound that echoed the pounding in my chest. As I walked past the darkened storefronts of closed auto body shops and flickering streetlights, I realized with a crystalline, cold clarity that blood doesn't make a family, loyalty does. My parents were currently sitting in their climate-controlled living room, likely watching a DVR'd episode of a true crime show while their son was wandering through a storm with less than $1 to his name. The injustice of it wasn't just a sting. It was an amputation. Every step away from that station was a step away from the Miller legacy, a slow and painful shedding of the skin of the boy who wanted to be loved. By the time I reached the outskirts of the city, My phone was a dead brick in my pocket and my feet were blistered and raw, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I understood then that the lesson Vanessa wanted to teach me had backfired spectacularly. She hadn't proven I was weak, she had simply shown me that I had nothing left to lose. Family is supposed to be the anchor that holds you steady in the storm, but for me they were the storm itself, and I was finally learning how to navigate the waves alone. As the rain soaked through my shirt and the temperature dropped to a shivering 62 degrees, I made a silent pact with the darkness that I would build a life so fortified and so successful that they would eventually look up at me from the bottom of the mountain they thought they had pushed me off of. This wasn't just a walk home. It was a pilgrimage toward a new identity, one where my value was determined by my own grit rather than my sister's calculated cruelty or my father's indifference. The walk was long, the rain was relentless, and the night was unforgiving, but for the first time in my 17 years, I was truly, terrifyingly free. I spent the next decade becoming a ghost, systematically erasing the boy who had been discarded at a bus station and replacing him with a man built of titanium and cold calculations. While Vanessa was busy racking up $42,000 in high-interest credit card debt at Nordstrom and failing out of her third attempt at a community college marketing degree, I had already committed myself to the grueling discipline of the ROTC program at Ohio State. My life became a series of 4 a.m. wake-up calls, the rhythmic thud of combat boots on frozen pavement, and the relentless pursuit of a degree in systems engineering that would eventually place me in the high-stakes world of defense contracting. During my junior year, I secured an internship working under a high-end financial auditor named Mr. Henderson, a man whose private office on the top floor of a glass and steel tower in downtown Columbus smelled perpetually of expensive mahogany polish and $80 an ounce Kopi Luwak espresso. Mr. Henderson was a predator of spreadsheets, a man who saw the world in black and white columns, and under his mentorship I learned how to weaponize data. Together, we meticulously documented every single penny I had ever contributed to the Miller household from my lawn mowing business and part-time jobs, contrasting it against the staggering $86,400 my parents, Robert and Elena, had poured into Vanessa's delusional influencer career. I remember the exact scratch of Mr. Henderson's fountain pen as he helped me categorize their expenditures. The $5,000 content creation trips to Miami, the $300 an hour professional photography sessions, and the constant bailouts for her overdrawn Chase liquid account. We tracked the $14,500 for the Honda Civic, the rising insurance premiums after her 3 at-fault accidents, and the thousands spent on aesthetic enhancements that Elena insisted were necessary for Vanessa's brand. Every receipt I had saved, every bank statement I had surreptitiously photographed, and every tax return I could find was fed into a comprehensive forensic audit of my own childhood. The resulting spreadsheet was a brutal, objective testament to a decade of systemic neglect and blatant favoritism, a digital ledger of every time I had been told there was no money for my basic needs while Vanessa's whims were funded with a blank check. Mr. Henderson would lean back in his leather chair, swirling his espresso in a gold-rimmed porcelain cup, and remark that numbers never lie, even when the people who generate them do. I wasn't just collecting data for a hobby. I was building a nuclear option, a financial dossier that proved my parents had effectively embezzled my potential to subsidize my sister's vanity. While they saw me as a quiet, compliant ghost who had drifted away into a modest military life, I was actually a lead systems engineer in the making, earning a 6-figure salary and living in a minimalist, high-security apartment in Arlington that cost $3,400 a month in rent. I drove a 2023 Midnight Black Tesla Model S, a vehicle that moved with a silent, predatory grace, and my bank accounts were fortified by a diversified portfolio of index funds and government bonds. I had become the person they always claimed to want, the successful, independent Miller, but I had done it by severing every emotional tie to their house of cards. The contrast between my reality and theirs was becoming a chasm that no amount of blood relation could bridge. As I sat in Mr. Henderson's office, watching the city lights flicker through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I realized that the lesson Vanessa had tried to teach me at the Amtrak station had cost her family everything. They thought they had discarded a nuisance, but they had actually ignored a debt that was now coming due, with 10 years of compounded interest and a ledger that finally had my name at the top of the page. Family isn't just a name on a birth certificate. It's a contract of mutual investment, and the Millers had defaulted on mine a long time ago. Now I was just waiting for the right moment to serve the papers and watch their gilded world collapse under the weight of their own choices. The trap was meticulously set for my parents' 30th anniversary party, a grand performance of suburban stability staged in the manicured backyard of their Indian Hill estate. 55 guests were crammed into the space, their laughter echoing off the limestone patio as they picked at $300 worth of catered Montgomery in barbecue and sipped chilled Chardonnay from stemless glass flutes. The humid evening air was thick with the smell of smoked brisket and the cloying sweetness of the lilies my mother had ordered from a boutique florist for $450. Vanessa was the center of attention, draped in a $1,200 Gucci Gigi Marmont jersey dress that I knew for a fact she couldn't afford, given her most recent credit score was hovering in the mid-50s. She was holding a glass of Moët and Chandon and loudly bragging to a circle of my father's golf associates about her new business venture, a supposed boutique social media agency that was actually just another $60,000 interest-free loan from my father's retirement portfolio. I arrived purposefully late, the sun beginning to dip behind the line of oak trees, driving my 2023 midnight black Tesla Model S into the gravel driveway with a silent, menacing elegance that drew more than a few glances from the neighbors. I stepped out of the car wearing a tailored charcoal suit from Sid Mashburn that cost more than Vanessa's monthly rent, and in my left hand, I carried a heavy, navy blue leather folder embossed with the seal of a premier forensic accounting firm. As I walked toward the patio, the rhythmic clicking of my custom-made Oxfords on the stone steps felt like a countdown to a detonation. My mother, Elena, spotted me first, her face momentarily freezing in a mask of polite confusion before she remembered to smile for the sake of the guests. "Caleb, you actually made it," she remarked, her voice dripping with that familiar, patronizing tone that suggested my presence was an unexpected but manageable inconvenience. My father, Robert, barely looked up from his conversation with a local city councilman, his eyes scanning my suit with a flicker of recognition that I was no longer the boy who mowed lawns for $20 bills. I didn't offer a hug or a handshake. Instead, I waited for a lull in Vanessa's exaggerated storytelling about her supposed influence in the New York fashion scene. The contrast was palpable. There she was, a carefully constructed facade of inherited wealth and unearned confidence, standing across from the brother she had abandoned at a bus station 10 years ago with less than $9 to his name. I felt a cold, surgical precision settle over me as I opened the navy blue folder, the high-quality linen paper inside crisp and white under the string of Edison bulbs hanging above the patio. Vanessa caught my eye and smirked, adjusting her Ray-Bans which she wore even as the light faded, likely preparing another jab about my lack of social standing. But before she could speak, I stepped into the center of the circle, the weight of a decade's worth of systemic neglect and financial documentation resting in my hands. The guests began to quiet down, sensing the shift in the atmosphere from celebratory to confrontational. I looked at my father, who was holding a gold-plated fountain pen he had received as a corporate gift, and I realized that the man who had spent $86,400 on my sister's vanity was about to see the true cost of his investment. I wasn't there to celebrate 30 years of a marriage built on favoritism. I was there to audit the debt, to present the itemized bill for every sacrifice I had made while they were busy funding a fantasy. The smell of the barbecue and the sound of the crickets in the tall grass seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the sharp, clear reality of the ledger I was about to read aloud. This wasn't just a party anymore. It was the final hearing in a case that had been open since that humid Saturday at the Amtrak station, and I was both the lead prosecutor and the primary witness. I adjusted my cuffs, took a breath of the cooling night air, and prepared to systematically dismantle the illusion of the perfect Miller family, one line item at a time. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant, and absolutely deserved. The moment of execution arrived with a surgical precision that only a decade of resentment and engineering discipline could produce. My father, Robert, stood up at the head of the long linen-covered table, his face flushed from the expensive Napa Valley Cabernet and the unearned pride of 30 years of a hollow marriage. He cleared his throat, clinking a silver spoon against his Waterford crystal glass to command the attention of the 55 guests who sat amidst the dying embers of the sunset. He began to speak about family unity, about the strength of the Miller bond, and the importance of supporting one another through the shifting tides of life. I didn't wait for him to finish his first paragraph. I simply stood up, the chair legs scraping against the limestone patio with a sharp, dissonant screech that cut through his practiced baritone like a blade. Speaking of unity and support, Dad, why don't we discuss the $12,300 that Vanessa borrowed from your 401k retirement fund just last month to cover the interest on her maxed-out Amex Gold card? I said, my voice projected with the calm authority of a man who had led million-dollar defense briefings. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the backyard, the only sound being the distant hum of a neighbor's pool filter and the soft clink of a fork hitting a ceramic plate. My mother's face turned a ghostly shade of parchment, her hand trembling as she gripped her napkin, while Vanessa's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, predatory panic. I didn't stop there. I reached into my navy blue folder and began systematically handing out 15 professionally bound copies of redacted bank statements and a blown-up GPS log from that humid Saturday on July 14, 10 years ago. These documents, verified by Mr. Henderson's firm, showed the exact flow of capital from my father's accounts into the void of Vanessa's failures, juxtaposed against the digital footprint of the car that had left me at the Cincinnati Union Terminal. To crown the performance, I pulled out my phone and synced it to the outdoor Bose surround sound system that my father had bragged about earlier. I pressed play on a digital restoration of a voicemail Vanessa had left me that night, a recording I had moved from phone to phone like a holy relic of betrayal. Her voice, high-pitched and slurred with the adrenaline of her own cruelty, filled the evening air, laughing about how she had left a 13-year-old boy stranded 60 miles from home in a city where he knew no one, just to see if he would actually cry for mommy. The guests sat frozen, their eyes darting between the glossy evidence in their hands and the golden girl who was now shrinking into her $1,200 Gucci dress. The contrast between the image of the perfect daughter she projected and the screeching, malicious teenager on the recording was absolute and irreversible. I watched my father's hand drop from his glass, the silver spoon clattering onto the stone, as the weight of $86,400 in wasted investment finally registered in his legalistic mind. He looked at the bank statement in front of him, seeing the specific withdrawal codes he thought were hidden, while Elena stared at the GPS map that proved her daughter had lied about the scenic drive for an entire decade. There was no more room for excuses or the polite fictions of Indian Hill society. I stood there in my tailored charcoal suit, the lead systems engineer they never helped build, watching the foundation of their manufactured reality crumble into the dirt of their own backyard. The air smelled of wood smoke and the sudden sharp ozone of a brewing storm, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible son. I was the only person in the yard who was truly, undeniably whole. Family isn't a speech given over barbecue and wine. It is the ledger of how you treat people when there is nothing to gain, and the Millers had just been declared ethically and emotionally bankrupt in front of everyone they ever sought to impress. The sound of my mother dropping her wine glass was the final punctuation mark on a decade of silence, a sharp, crystalline explosion that sent shards of lead crystal and expensive Cabernet splashing across the limestone patio stones like a fresh crime scene. The neighbors, a collection of Indian Hill's most prominent socialites and my father's legal partners, began to whisper in a low, frantic hiss that sounded like a nest of disturbed vipers. I stood perfectly still, the cooling evening breeze fluttering the edges of my tailored charcoal suit jacket, and I looked Vanessa directly in her dilated, terrified eyes. "You wanted me to find my way back then, didn't you, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice carrying with a cold, engineered precision that cut through the humid air. "Well, I did exactly what you suggested, and that path led me through the grit of survival, through the discipline of the ROTC, and straight into a life where I am the one who holds the ledger." I watched her lower her head, the $1,200 Gucci dress now looking like a cheap costume as the weight of the recorded voicemail and the financial audit settled over the crowd. I reached into my navy blue folder one last time and pulled out a final document, placing it on the linen tablecloth right next to the shattered glass. It was a formal cease and desist order drafted by the best litigators in Arlington, accompanied by a detailed, itemized bill for the $4,500 I had lent my parents over the last 2 years for what they called medical emergencies. My investigation, backed by Mr. Henderson's forensic team, had traced those exact funds directly into Vanessa's overdue car payments for that taffeta white Honda Civic and her soaring insurance premiums. I saw my father's hand tremble as he reached for the paper, his eyes scanning the legal jargon and the undeniable proof that he had used his son's hard-earned military savings to subsidize his daughter's reckless stagnation. "You told me to figure it out, and what I figured out is that blood is just a biological coincidence, but loyalty and respect are the only currencies that matter in the real world." I have spent 10 years building a fortress that none of you are invited into, and today I am officially closing the account on the Miller family. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant rhythmic chirping of crickets and the frantic whispering of the neighbors who were already mentally drafting the gossip that would ruin my parents' reputation by Monday morning. I didn't wait for a rebuttal or a tearful apology that would have been 10 years too late and several $1,000s short. I turned on my heel, the soles of my custom Oxfords clicking with a final, decisive sound against the stone, and walked toward my 2023 midnight black Tesla Model S. As I pulled out of the gravel driveway, the silent electric motor surged with a power they could never hope to contain, and I caught a glimpse of them in the rearview mirror. A fractured, pathetic tableau of people standing amidst the ruins of a 30-year lie. My name is Caleb Miller, and while they were busy decorating a house of cards, I was busy becoming the storm that would eventually blow it down. Family isn't who you're born with. It's who stays when the lights go out and the money runs dry. And as I drove toward the highway, I realized I had never been more at home than I was in that moment of total, beautiful isolation. The lesson was finally over, the debt was settled in full, and for the first time since that humid day at the Amtrak station, I breathed air that didn't taste like betrayal. I was gone before the first teardrop hit the pavement, leaving them with nothing but a bill they couldn't pay and a legacy they could no longer protect. The aftermath of that anniversary night unfolded with the inevitable grinding gravity of a slow-motion car crash, a systemic collapse that no amount of Miller prestige could stall or deflect. Within 6 months, the grand Indian Hill estate with its limestone patios and manicured lawns was liquidated to settle a mountain of hidden liabilities, forcing my parents, Robert and Elena, to downsize into a cramped 900-square-foot apartment on the noisy outskirts of Kettering where the walls smelled of old tobacco and the HVAC system rattled like a dying engine. They had effectively drained their entire diversified retirement portfolio, nearly $740,000 of accumulated wealth, just to maintain the illusion of Vanessa's success and cover the black hole of her mounting debts. Vanessa herself became a casualty of her own vanity as 2 major creditors filed concurrent lawsuits for the $42,000 in unsecured consumer debt she had racked up, leading to the repossession of that 2012 taffeta white Honda Civic and a court-ordered garnishment of her non-existent wages. The golden girl who once wore $1,200 Gucci dresses was forced to trade her designer heels for steel-toed work boots, taking a grueling job at a regional Amazon fulfillment center where she worked 48 hours a week on the graveyard shift, moving heavy pallets for $18.50 an hour in a warehouse that felt like a refrigerated tomb. During the first week of their new, stark reality, my phone lit up with 14 missed calls from my father's work number and my mother's personal cell, their voicemails transitioning from desperate demands for financial assistance to hollow, tearful apologies that arrived 10 years too late to matter. I didn't listen to a single one of them past the first 5 seconds. Instead, I contacted my service provider, paid the $30 administrative fee, and changed my primary number to a private, unlisted line that only my firm and a few trusted colleagues possessed. I also instructed my legal team in Arlington to finalize the collection on the $4,500 they owed me, ensuring that the final remnants of our connection were processed through a sterile, third-party intermediary rather than a family dinner table. As I sit in my minimalist office today, the silence is expensive and hard-earned, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the life they tried to drown me in. I watch the sun set over the Potomac River from the window of my 2023 midnight black Tesla Model S, knowing that while they are counting pennies to pay for a communal laundry room, I am calculating the trajectory of my next career advancement. The moral of this story isn't about revenge, although the symmetry of their downfall is undeniably poetic. It is about the cold, mathematical reality that you cannot build a legacy on the back of the child you discarded and expect the structure to hold. Family isn't a bloodline that grants you a blank check for betrayal. It is a series of investments in character, loyalty, and mutual respect, and the Millers had been operating in a deficit since the day they left me at that Amtrak station with $8.45. I have finally reached a place where their names are just entries in an old ledger. A debt that has been written off and forgotten in the pursuit of a life that is entirely, vibrantly my own. They taught me how to be independent by trying to break me, and in the end, the only thing they succeeded in doing was ensuring that when I finally reached the top I would be standing there alone, exactly the way they left me. My name is Caleb Miller, and I am the only architect of my own future. A man who found his way home by realizing that home was never a place, but the strength to walk away from anyone who doesn't deserve to be part of the journey. I have officially moved into a high-rise in the Lakeshore East neighborhood of Chicago, a glass and steel sanctuary where my floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic, unobstructed view of Lake Michigan's deep cobalt waters. My living room is anchored by a $4,000 aniline-dyed Italian leather sofa from Natuzzi, its surface smelling of premium hides and sophisticated craftsmanship, a tactile reminder that I no longer have to settle for the discarded remnants of someone else's life. There are absolutely no hand-me-downs in this space. Every piece of furniture, from the minimalist marble coffee table to the brushed steel floor lamps, was purchased with the currency of my own labor and the strategic execution of my career goals. I have solidified a rigorous 10-year financial plan that includes a diversified investment portfolio and a 401k with a robust 6% company match from my firm, a benefit that ensures my future is built on a foundation of compounded growth rather than the shaky ground of family inheritance. My life is no longer a series of desperate calculations made on greasy napkins. Instead, it is a streamlined operation managed with the same precision I apply to defense interceptor subsystems. More importantly, I have cultivated a circle of friends, true peers like my colleague Sarah and my former mentor Mr. Henderson, who actually show up when I call, people whose loyalty is not a transaction and whose presence doesn't come with a hidden psychological cost. When I sit on my balcony at night, watching the rhythmic pulse of the lighthouse across the water, I think about that boy at the Union Terminal and realize he would hardly recognize the man I have become. I have replaced the smell of diesel and stale popcorn with the scent of high-end espresso and the crisp, clean air of the lakefront, a sensory shift that mirrors the total transformation of my identity. My parents and Vanessa are now just static in the background of a story that moved on without them, their voices silenced by the sheer volume of my success and the impenetrable walls of the life I have constructed. I am 26 years old, I am a lead systems engineer, and for the first time in my existence, I am not the invisible son or the failed experiment. I am the architect of a legacy that belongs to me alone. The 60 miles between Cincinnati and my new reality might as well be 60 million, because the person who was discarded in the rain has finally found a home that is fortified by something stronger than blood. I look at my bank balance, then at the horizon where the water meets the sky, and I realize that the best revenge wasn't just exposing their lies. It was building a life so magnificent that their betrayal eventually became the least interesting thing about me. My name is Caleb Miller and I have finally figured it out, not as a lesson in cruelty, but as a masterclass in resilience and the ultimate triumph of the self-made man. This is the final page of the old ledger, and as I close it, I do so with the knowledge that my value was never theirs to define. I am whole, I am secure, and I am finally, irrevocably free. True revenge is never truly about the visceral satisfaction of watching someone suffer or the chaotic energy of an eye for an eye. Instead, it is about the cold, calculated construction of a reality where they can never, under any circumstances, possess the power to hurt you again. I sat in my ergonomic Herman Miller Aeron chair, the silent hum of my custom-built workstation providing a steady white noise as I pulled up a final, blank outgoing message on my encrypted mail server. I addressed it to Vanessa's old Gmail account, the one she used to sign up for all those failed influencer platforms and high-interest store credit cards that were now haunting her credit report like vengeful ghosts. I typed a single devastatingly simple sentence. I truly hope the hot chocolate you went to get 10 years ago at the Union Terminal was worth the $86,400 of our parents' retirement and the permanent loss of the only brother who would have actually stayed to help you when the world finally stopped buying your lies. I didn't wait for a read receipt or a frantic, guilt-ridden reply that would undoubtedly attempt to gaslight me into a false reconciliation for the sake of her own financial survival. I moved my cursor over her contact information in my Outlook directory, the digital representation of a decade of trauma and systemic neglect, and I hit the delete key with a firm final click that felt like the snapping of a heavy iron chain. I then proceeded to block her MAC address and her cellular IMEI across all my personal and professional devices, ensuring that no digital ghost of her existence could ever flicker across my screens again. My life is now a high-fidelity masterpiece of my own design, a sequence of events where every variable is accounted for and every risk is mitigated by my own competence as a lead systems engineer. I watched the message sent notification fade from the corner of my monitor, replaced by a technical schematic for a new modular sensor array I was scheduled to present to the Department of Defense on Monday morning. The $4,000 Italian leather of my sofa was cool against my skin as I stood up to look out at the Chicago skyline, the lights of the city twinkling like a vast, complex circuit board that I finally knew how to navigate. Vanessa is likely finishing her shift at the warehouse right now, her hands calloused and her mind preoccupied with the crushing weight of her $400 a month minimum debt payments, while I am contemplating the purchase of a second property in the Blue Ridge Mountains as a long-term capital hedge. The contrast is no longer a source of bitterness for me. It is simply a logical outcome of the data points we both provided over the last 10 years. Family is a word that no longer carries the weight of obligation in my vocabulary, replaced instead by a profound appreciation for the people I have chosen to let into my inner circle based on their proven loyalty and shared values. I have effectively deleted the malware of my upbringing and replaced it with an operating system built on self-reliance, high-yield investments, and a fundamental refusal to be a victim of anyone's calculated cruelty ever again. As I closed the lid of my laptop and walked toward the kitchen to pour myself a glass of 20-year-old scotch, I realized that the boy on the cold metal bench in Cincinnati had finally finished his journey. I am Caleb Miller, and I am no longer looking back at the wreckage because I am too busy enjoying the view from the summit of the mountain I climbed alone. The silence in my high-rise is not lonely. It is the peaceful, expensive sound of a life that has been completely and utterly redeemed. My story didn't end with a tragedy at a bus station. It began there, and today I am the one who finally holds the pen for every chapter yet to come. I am secure, I am successful, and I am done with the ghosts of Indian Hill forever. Today, I lead a specialized team of 12 senior systems engineers within a high-security defense facility in Arlington, managing a department where the margin for error is measured in microseconds and the technical specifications are as rigid as the steel in our interceptor housings. We build complex, integrated networks and kinetic failsafes that are designed with a fundamental obsession with reliability, because I understand with a visceral, haunting clarity exactly what happens when a system breaks down under pressure and the people you rely on simply vanish from the equation. My leadership style is a direct reflection of the discipline I forged in the aftermath of my abandonment, a philosophy built on the belief that a structure is only as strong as its most neglected component. I have found a profound, unshakable peace in the rhythmic precision of my professional life and the absolute, curated quiet of my high-rise home in Chicago, where every object from the $4,000 Italian leather sofa to the custom-milled mahogany desk is a testament to my own survival. I spend my evenings reviewing technical blueprints or analyzing market trends for my diversified investment portfolio, which now includes a significant stake in aerospace municipal bonds and a 401k that I manage with a 6% company match. The ghost of the boy who sat on a cold metal bench in Cincinnati with $8.45 has finally been integrated into the man who authorizes seven-figure procurement contracts for the Department of Defense. I no longer feel the phantom sting of the humid Ohio air or the nausea associated with the smell of stale popcorn and diesel fuel because I have replaced those traumatic sensory inputs with the clean ozone scent of high-altitude flight decks and the rich aroma of $80 an ounce espresso. My sister Vanessa exists only as a cautionary data point in a forensic audit. A woman who traded a lifetime of familial loyalty for a $1,200 Gucci dress and a one-way ticket to a warehouse graveyard shift. My parents, Robert and Elena, are relegated to the periphery of my history, living out their downsizing in a 900-square-foot apartment while I navigate the summit of a career they never bothered to support. There is a specific kind of dignity that comes from being the only person responsible for your own ascent, a clarity of purpose that is only available to those who have been forced to build their own foundations from the rubble of a betrayal. I look at the team of 12 engineers I lead and I see the value of true collaboration and mutual respect, a contrast so sharp to my upbringing that it serves as a daily reminder of how far I have traveled from that Amtrak station. I have meticulously engineered a life that is immune to the whims of toxic people, a fortress of professional achievement and personal financial security that requires no external validation to remain standing. The silence of my living room as I watch the sunset over Lake Michigan is not a void but a victory, a hard-earned tranquility that was purchased with the sweat of 12 mowed lawns a weekend and a decade of refusing to be broken by people who shared my DNA but none of my integrity. I am Caleb Miller, a lead systems engineer who knows that while systems can be repaired and code can be rewritten, a family that defaults on its own children is a debt that can never be settled. I have closed the ledger, deleted the contacts, and moved into a future where the only person I have to answer to is the man I see in the mirror. My peace is my own, my success is my own, and for the first time in 26 years, the world is exactly as I have designed it to be. Family isn't blood. Family is who stays when the truth comes out, and as it turns out, I was the only one who stayed true to myself.